So I'd like to welcome everybody to the St. Louis CSCMP June's webinar. Appreciate everybody being here. My name is Brad Reinhardt. I am past board president of our fine local roundtable. So I really appreciate everybody come from Competitive Insights for offering their insights on this very topical topic, I guess we're calling it. We do have some upcoming events that we're working on here for the St. Louis board. July 23rd, we're working on a joint happy hour with the Transportation Club of St. Louis at O London here in St. Louis. We'll have some information out on that next week. Also, the CSCMP National Conference is in Nashville, Tennessee this year, October 4th through 7th. And also here locally, we are working on our fall seminar, and we'll have details out on that soon. If you'd like to join our email list, go to stlcscmp.org, and I'll put my contact information down in the chat. So if anybody has any questions or comments, please just email me directly. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Mr. Richard Sharpe. He is a recognized industry innovator and author of Proven Analytical Solutions. Richard is currently the CEO of Competitive Insights, LLC, and was inducted into Georgia's Tech Council of Distinguished Engineering Alumni. Competitive Insights provides AI-enhanced data analytics that pinpoint actionable cost to serve and net landed profit analytical insights. The insights serve as a foundation to the continually improved and protect operational efficiency and margin contributions. Competitive Insights has successfully supported over 50 companies, averaging 500% ROI in weeks. Very, very impressive. So thank you, Richard. Thank you, Tammy, and take it away.
Very good. Thank you, Brad, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And as Brad said, Tammy will be helping with the polling here. So we're very excited to be here and very excited to talk about tariff strategies that are really focused on a responsive and repeatable approach. One thing I'd like to mention at the very beginning is, although we're going to focus on tariffs, really what we're going to be talking about is any disruption to the supply chain. So the thought process is that everything we're talking about today is very relevant, whether it's a port strike, a tariff increase, supplier failures, etc. Let's get started. So we're going to just have one slide on Competitive Insights. And that is just to tell you a little bit more of what Brad was offering before. We are a AI-enabled data analytics firm. We focus on providing information to help people minimize costs, protect and increase margin performance. But in order for that to be true, the data that is being used to be able to address the issues, the questions at hand, have to have the attributes on the bottom. And if the data is not trusted and accurate, specific and repeatable, it is not actionable. And so we work very hard to be sure that for every customer, that is true, not only in their first use of this solution, but on their ongoing use over time, month after month. And let's move right into the talk. And we're going to start with our first case study. And this is a manufacturer based in Chicago with 150,000 delivery locations. The head of global operations wanted to understand, a lot of complexity with different warehouses, third-party logistics service providers, a very complex product portfolio. How can we reduce complexity? How can we think about making the operation more efficient? And so they had, out of 150,000 locations, the question of how many customer locations are we actually getting 80% of our profit from? So take a moment and think about that. 150,000 locations just in the US. They're a global company. But what do you think would be a reasonable number out of 150,000 that of locations would give them 80% of their profit? Well, the answer may surprise you, and it's less than 3%. So 2,800 basic delivery locations gave them 80% of their profit. What was really interesting, I mean, obviously that was very useful, but look at the other numbers. 106,000 locations only gave them a small amount of profitability, and 40,000 locations were totally unprofitable. So, as we think about that and we think about tariffs and mitigation, the question is, how would you address that, knowing that to be true for your customer base, tariff strategies? Said another way, if you're thinking about, as an example, price increases, and you know the tariffs are going to have a significant impact on your bottom line, if you've got 3% of your customer base that's giving you 80% of your profit, would your tariff strategy for those customers be the same as it would be for the unprofitable customers? I doubt it. So it's all about having insights and information around what customers are doing as far as performance goes and margin contributions, and having diversified strategies that allow you to be able to be smarter and not just protect margin, potentially grow margin because you're going to be outperforming your competitors. Does that make sense? All right, then let's keep going. So here are the takeaways. We're going to repeat these at the end, but we want to just kind of summarize it for you as we move forward. So basically, we just talked about how, knowing the segmentation of customers and products and profitability, understanding the customers that are really giving you the vast majority of your profitable performance, shifting it, the focus around high value analysis as opposed to data gathering, using it cross-functionally to be able to capitalize on that, because truly this can become a competitive advantage. And then being able to do this on an ongoing basis. But the bottom line is these are the themes that we're going to talk about as we walk through the material. And with that, Tammy, I think we have our first polling question.
Yes, all right. So let me launch this question here. All right, so you should all see a pop-up with the question, how quickly can you access trusted data for changing tariff strategies? Okay. All right, so let me share the results.
I'm excited to see this, what everybody's thinking. No, not very easy. Didn't make it for anyone, right? But that's a good number. 50%, somewhat easy. That's a better number than we've seen in many other cases. Difficult, yeah, very difficult, sure. All right. Well, again, thank you for offering that. Let's talk a little bit about data and why it's so important for being able to do tariff mitigation. And to start, we're going to look at an end-to-end supply chain. So this is a very simple diagram, but we're going to use it to actually characterize the importance of data for tariff mitigation. And what we see here, as on your screen, we have international suppliers. It could be your manufacturing or obviously offshore manufacturing from someone else. We're bringing it in by boat, by plane, various ways. Obviously, today it's going to be on tariffs, but as I said, this could be any disruption. We may have domestic suppliers. We may have, issues associated with being able to get it between our facilities or someone else's facilities, a customer facility, and then we're finally getting it to the end customer. So when we think about this for any supply chain, we're thinking about an end-to-end view, right? And if we're thinking about actually having accurate and specific information that is actionable, as we talked about before, then how much data are we talking about? And how are we going to go about making sure that the data we're using to mitigate tariffs is actually accurate and trusted so that we can make great decisions to actually protect or increase margin performance. So let's look at that. So actually, for typical supply chains that we support for our customers, it is not uncommon for there to be 4 to 5 billion transactions associated with the flow of product from the origin of the product until the final end delivery. And that's a lot of data. So what we're going to talk about is how we can use that and turn that data into a true asset that helps an organization be able to gain that competitive advantage that we talked about. So to talk through that a little bit more, we're going to do another case study. And this happens to be an apparel company. You probably all have their products in your house. And we were walking through doing exactly this for that particular company. The CFO of the company stood up, walked to the screen, and said, "I would love to be able to do this, but I just don't think our data is good enough to support it." Now, I want you to hold on to that idea because we're going to, in just a few minutes, we're going to talk about what came out of that when we actually did go through the process of providing information associated with cost and profit by customer, product, channel, and region that addresses the issues that that particular CFO had. But we often hear these points that people are excited to hear are possible, but the reality is people spend a lot of time reconciling data. All right, so with that in hand, we're going to go into polling question number 2, I believe.
Yes, all right. So let me go ahead and launch this next question. What are your primary areas of focus when addressing tariff changes? This one is a multiple choice, so you could select as many as you like, but please take a moment and enter your response.
All right, we've got suppliers, of course, that makes lots of sense. Pricing adjustments. So again, being able to say we're going to do generalized pricing increases or discounts is a very popular strategy. And hopefully what we're going to be talking about today will be useful as you think about doing that. Reducing supply chain costs, of course, and waiting. And that we often hear that people are, that the tariff change is going to change again. We're not ready to make any material updates on our pricing or any other substantial change until we see what's going to settle down. So these are very meaningful answers, and thank you for that. And so let's get into a little bit about now focusing on data, focusing on how and what we can do to mitigate tariffs to be able to build on the answers that you just gave us in that polling. So we're going to break this up into a couple parts. And we're going to start off by, again, looking at all of the data that we talked about. We said 4 to 5 billion transactions, right? Well, what are those transactions? Well, we have sourcing costs, and some of you answered that is an area that you're focused on, changing sourcing. Obviously, we have our inbound costs. We have our tariff costs. We have all of the costs associated with interfacility movements. We have our distribution and warehousing costs. We have fixed costs associated with that. We have outbound costs, right? And we're actually many times, especially in today's world, we have a reverse logistics. Products are being returned. So if we consider that all of those costs are relevant to the bottom line, which we know they are, what we're going to use is a term called net landed cost to serve. So all the costs at the transactional level, bottom up, we're not allocating costs, we're building it from the transactions associated with the flow of product from its origin to the final destination. Now, let's take that a little bit further. We're going to now look at the revenue. And so for the revenue, we're actually going to say, okay, let's go down and look at the specific areas for each individual customer. What was the selling price for that product? What were the promotions? What were the discounts? And because I have the ability to handle that type of information and it is trusted, I verified and validated it, I can have the net landed revenue for every product being sold to every customer. So if I have the net landed cost and I have the net landed revenue for every product, every customer, then I have the ability, of course, to be able to create the net landed profit. And the net landed profit is basically looking at the revenue, minus the cost to be able to give me an accurate and specific cost and profit for every item for every customer. So what would we do with that information? And what has that got to do with tariff mitigation? So this is going to look like for you a profit and loss statement, right? So you've got revenue section, you've got your cost section, but the difference here is that this is not based on allocations. This is not a general ledger. These are calculations based on the actual transactions from the bottom up. So when I actually look at a transportation load from St. Louis to Atlanta for a particular set of products that I know are on that one truck that day, I'm using the cost associated with that truck for those items in this calculation. Does that make sense? And when I do that, and I do that for every transaction we talked about, I have the ability to have something that, again, we'll call net landed profit that allows me to look at all of the net revenue, this area, and all the costs to come up with what you'll see down on the bottom, NLP, net landed profit, that I can look at in any way that I want to look at it. All right? And obviously, this is certainly a lot more specific and detailed than you can do with your ERP. Okay, so let's take this a little bit further. What we're doing, defined by each customer. So this is not a cookie cutter one way or no way. This is every customer defines how they want to treat their revenues, discounts, returns, chargebacks, etc. Right? So they define that. Then we look at all the costs. So the costs, in this case, we're focusing on tariffs. But one thing to note is if you look at just the size of the tariff costs, this is overall for the whole company. We haven't gotten it down to a SKU yet. We see that tariffs are very important, but there are a lot of other costs that can add up to be a lot more than tariffs, right? We all can see that. So how are we going to use that information? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on having that kind of information to create, a net landed profit margin. In this case, as we see, they were losing money when all the costs were considered, versus what they were using on a standard margin, which is often just calculated based on some form of sourcing cost. And then the rest of the costs are spread like peanut butter, right? Allocations, we all know how that works. But in this case, we are actually looking at it for every channel, SKU, customer, supplier, etc. And we can see that once those costs have been defined based on the way they want to look at them, we're actually losing money. Now, this is just a backdrop to talk about how we're going to use this information to focus on tariffs. So if we have that kind of information, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the actual cost structures for every driver. So consider you have revenue drivers, you have cost drivers, and we're going to look for opportunities to offset tariff costs by finding other areas that are going to help us gain that competitive advantage. And this is not, we're not making any radical changes here. We're just gaining visibility to the products that matter the most, the customers that matter the most, and we're creating diversified strategies based on the performance of those products and customers based on margin contribution. So we're just going to say we're going to treat our really profitable customers and our really profitable products different when we're thinking about tariffs than we are the products and customers that we're losing money on. Because if we're losing money on particular customers or products already, we have a problem whether the tariffs are going up or not, right? I mean, obviously. So having that visibility becomes very critical in coming up with great strategies for tariff mitigation. Okay, do you remember the guy that was standing up in front of the screen and he was saying, I just don't think our data is good enough and I'd love to see this, but I don't think it's going to work for us? We hear that all the time. This is actually the outcome in 10 weeks with that particular company. Now, if you know the apparel supply chain, you know that it's very complex. I'm sure just as complex, or maybe yours is even more complex. But we're being able to focus on all those transactions we talked about as it relates to their particular company. So they had the sourcing, but now they have cutting centers where they're cutting the cloth, sewing the cloth, moving it between countries, handling it. They were dyeing it to the particular colors, and then they finally got it to their customers. So this was their particular end-to-end supply chain. And the CFO, once he knew that the data was being used, can be supported and trusted to answer the questions they wanted to ask, then that CFO and the head of global supply chain asked this following question. We have 142,000 products. We have 875 colors. How many of those colors are actually giving us 80% of our profit? Because if we can reduce the colors that are in our portfolio, we can reduce the complexity associated with the operation. We can do smart things around tariff mitigation, etc. Want to take a guess out of 875 colors? Well, here you go. 53 colors. 53 colors out of 875 colors gave them 80% of their profit. Now, the great story about this is that the theory before this was actually done was that there were certain colors that were absolutely never producing any margin for the company. And one of those colors, what it was suspected, was fuchsia. And this is a story you'll remember. So the question was, is fuchsia a color that's making profit across all product lines, men, women, children, small, large, medium, whatever? And the answer was no. Fuchsia never made $1 of profit across all product lines in the history of the company. And for the first time, the CFO and the global supply chain officer were able to convince the actual product planning organization that was looking at releasing the next release of products to take fuchsia out of the product line, which reduced the complexity associated with the supply chain, gave them more resources to focus on the very profitable products, and made their supply chain more resilient. Make sense? So I think we're on polling question number 3, Tammy.
Yes, our last polling question. All right, so let me launch the question. How diversified are your tariff mitigation strategies? This one is a single choice question, so if you could just choose the one that's most appropriate to your organization.
I'm excited to see this. Oh my gosh, look at that. Not diversified at all. That's a first for us. We usually get a little bit on some of the others. Normally it is, the not diversified at all is generally the most popular answer, but this one is, well, there you go. So hopefully this information is helpful. Let's hope. That's great. Thank you, Tammy, for that. That's very helpful. All right. Well, now that we know we need to focus on diversified strategies, let's get right into it. How do we do it? And we're going to do that by looking at a a couple of different, very short-term and intermediate and long-term strategies using the information that we've been talking about in order to directly mitigate tariffs smartly so that we have a repeatable process, meaning every month as things change, whether it's tariffs or anything else, and to always focus on things that make sense in order to protect shareholder and stakeholder value. That's really, the bottom line on all of this. And so here we go. Let's get right into it. So we're going to talk about short-term strategies for tariff mitigation, intermediate strategies, and long-term strategies, because the goal is not necessarily we're going to get rid of the products. Now, the fuchsia, they got rid of it because it only made sense. But for a lot of products, you've got to have a particular product that may be unprofitable because your really profitable customers are also buying it. And that's a very legitimate thing, obviously, you have to do. But what we want to do at a minimum is get as much of this unprofitable activity to move more towards at least marginal contributions with our tariff mitigation strategies, and hopefully some of the very marginal to move to profitable, very profitable. So if we can accomplish creating mitigation strategies that are smart based on margin contribution, and that help us move to actually increase the overall profitability of the company, and you're the focus of doing that, you're a hero, right? And everybody's going to want to get on that bandwagon because everybody wants to be able to be associated with something that is, what your shareholders and stakeholders want. And this all gets down to the bottom line of trusted information that gives you very specific insights that are allowing you to take smart actions around diversified strategies. Okay, so let's jump into the short-term strategies. Okay, so here we go. So now we have the another product portfolio distribution, if you will, based on margin. And again, just another sample, we see that we have 2,500 products that are unprofitable. Now, that's important because when we look over at the opportunities, meaning, let me explain opportunities. So let's say that we sell t-shirts. I'm going to stay with apparel since we've been in apparel. Let's say that we have t-shirts and we want to understand where opportunities are for men's t-shirts, as an example. Well, I may sell a lot of different kinds of men's t-shirts, short sleeve, long sleeve, dark colors, seasonal, non-seasonal, lots of different variations. And I'm sure that's true for whatever product categories are in your company. So what I want to be able to do is say for men's t-shirts, for the drivers that I have, such as pricing, discounts, returns, tariff costs, whatever the drivers are, I want to know what the average performance is for men's t-shirts as it relates to standard cost or sourcing cost, or the discounts I'm giving for men's t-shirts across all men's t-shirts. And the reason I want to know that is that if I have, the ability to compare every SKU to what the average is for that category. So my men's t-shirts, I'm going to look at every t-shirt that's a man's t-shirt and compare it to a benchmark. And for the benchmark values where it's above the benchmark for certain categories, that could be a good thing or a bad thing. We'll go into that in a second. Or below. So if my actual pricing, what I'm getting in my revenue, is higher than the average, that's a good thing. But if my costs are higher than the average for men's t-shirts, that's an opportunity. It doesn't mean you can get all the opportunities. It just means it helps you focus and pinpoint where to look. Make sense? So we have, for this particular example, for our, men's t-shirts and all other products this company is selling. We are looking at unprofitable products, and we know we have $17 million of opportunity based on an average benchmark. Now, this is not using external data and other companies' performance. This is just for your company. We have $17 million of total benchmark opportunity. So let's drive this home to being able to think about tariffs. So if I've got all of these unprofitable products, right? And let's just say now my tariffs are going to increase by 25%. So my tariffs are going from 2.2 million to 2.8 million. All right, if that's the case, do I think that I can get out of that 17 million, $3 million of opportunity to offset the tariff costs? I'm sure. I'm sure there are things I can do. I may just focus on discounts and selling price and just say, I'm only going to look at the men's t-shirts or any other products that fall into an opportunity and just say, where can I change my discounts or where can I change my selling price to at least compensate for $2.8 million that the tariffs are going to have across all my products. So it's, again, getting down to actionable information that says I can minimize the tariff impact. In fact, I can do better than just minimizing it. I can actually look at opportunities to increase the margin contributions for the company. Okay, so that was short term. What about intermediate? What can I do that's not just, next month, but over the next 3 to 6 months? Well, one thing, and people were answered that in their polling, is that they can look at, particular products and decide, is there some other way that we can actually source this product? So let's just say we are back in men's t-shirts. And let's say that I have two sources for that. One's in Indonesia and one is in China. But the tariffs are going to be very different for those two countries. Well, this particular product, again, I can see which products are consistently losing money. So this product is just that. It's lost money every month, right? And with the tariff increase, what's going to happen, obviously, is I'm just going to lose more money, right? Sure. And particularly because the tariffs have gone up. But what can I do about that? Well, I could look at Indonesia and say, are they actually destroying margin for this particular product just as they were in China? And I'm not picking on any one country, but just as an example. And I can see that my tariffs and just sourcing on another vendor that makes the same product, which I know takes time. It's not something you're going to do next month, but it may take a couple of months. I can actually move from 176 to $76 million. So I have drastically reduced my tariff costs, and I have now gone from an unprofitable product performance to a net landed profit margin of 5.3%. Because I had the ability to just look at the impact in sourcing on an alternate supplier and what that impact would be on the actual margin contributions for those particular products. Okay, makes sense? One more case study. So this is a flooring manufacturer that was basically looking to get the kind of visibility we're talking about. And they were doing a lot of sourcing from China and other countries. And they needed to be able to get to the type of details that we're talking about here with data that was in lots of different places, very typical for almost all companies. And look at what they found. This was just for one SKU. One product gave them a 640% ROI. One product. Because they had the visibility and to be able to make changes that drove increased profitability and obviously great results. So let's talk about long-term strategies. We've talked about short-term strategies and just being able to look at pricing, being able to look at discounts. We've looked at intermediate strategies. Can we source this smartly on another country or another supplier where the tariffs are not, as bad as they could be for wherever the increases are occurring? What does long-term look like? Well, long-term is really interesting. And what we're going to do is we're going to start off by showing you a map. Now, this map, everybody can do this. This is just a map of every customer location. And the size of the bubble is just representing the amount of revenue that's being generated at those locations. So very simple, nothing, new about any of that. But now what we want to do is we want to ask the question, where are we, again, making money and losing money? And what can we do about that in order to be able to mitigate tariff impact? So what if we change the view? What if we say, well, we're not just going to look at the dots based on how much revenue, we're going to color code the dot based on whether they're profitable or not. So look at this. We happen to be in Atlanta. There are two very large customers in the Atlanta area that are buying a ton of product from us that are totally unprofitable. Be interesting to know that, right? Especially if I'm thinking about where I can cut costs, where I should think about pricing, all the things we've been talking about. But we also have large green dots here in Texas. We have some up here in Wisconsin. So these customers are generating a lot of revenue, but we're making a lot of money. Then I have the little yellow dots. And that is saying I'm making money, not very much, but I am still making money from these customer locations. So it's kind of a complicated map, right? I mean, it's a lot of dots and a lot of colors. But what if I just start looking at my really profitable customers? What does that mean from a strategy perspective in being able to think about cost reductions and tariff mitigation? Let's take a look. This is very typical, by the way. So look at this. Just looking at the customers where we're getting 96% of our profit, I'm only spending 54% of my costs. Now, if you knew that was true, and you had 54% of your operating costs that was being defined for 96% of your profit, would that be useful to know? Of course it would be, because I'm not going to not service the other customers, but I'm sure going to be sure that I'm servicing these customers really well. And then the question is, well, what about the other, 46% of my costs? What's that going to? Can I do something smarter about that? And the answer is yes. I know I want to start here, but then what I want to do is I want to start factoring in what it's costing me first to do the little yellow dots, the marginal customers. How much more cost is that creating? If I'm doing a network redesign, how might I change my network to always ensure my really profitable customers are getting what they need? But now I'm also servicing my marginal customers smartly, maybe changing service a little. It's not, next day. Maybe it's, next 2 days. And for these big red dots, maybe I go from, in fact, that very first case study, they went from, for really unprofitable customers, they went from giving everybody next day service to the unprofitable customers getting next week service. And they dropped $3 million from their outbound transportation spend. So it's all about smart ways based on diversification to be able to be smarter about tariff mitigation or any disruption in order to be able to grow margin, gain competitive advantage, think about smart ways to manage, the overall profitability. So let's wrap this up. We're staying with apparel. And now you may say, well, that's all great, but can I look forward? Can I look at, I don't know what tariffs are going to be next month, and nobody does. So how do I start not only just looking at what's happening today, how do I start looking at it going forward? So scenarios, predictive analytics. So in this particular case, we're going to be focusing on suppliers. And as you can see on the map, the red dots represent supplier locations where I am sourcing my products, and those products that I'm getting from those suppliers are totally unprofitable. All right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the question, where do I start mitigating tariffs for these particular suppliers? And so what I'm now, remember we talked about segmenting diversified strategies. Now I'm looking at the same net landed profit report, remember, tailored for your particular company. And we're being able to look at all the costs and the revenues associated with unprofitable products, marginal products, and very profitable products. And we can see what our revenues are and our costs are for every category, because we know we've already, established we've got a lot of activity going on, cost associated with unprofitable products and customers. But we also have established that there is, a percentage of our costs that's significantly, lower than the total cost to support our very profitable products. So I'm going to use this information to start looking forward, to forecast what could be, not what has happened in the past. All right, so let's look into that a little bit more. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look at a forecast. I'm going to forecast future opportunity. Now that forecast might be from your particular input, or we have ways to be able to look at product forecasts, obviously using accurate and specific data. Okay, so now what we're doing is we're looking at the same net landed profit report. We're focusing in on the actual line items, the drivers of revenue and cost. We're using benchmark, again, it can be t-shirts, it can be any product, and it's down to the category you want. It may be men's short sleeve t-shirts. In your case, it's whatever is the right designation. But whatever that designation is, benchmarked, we have forecasted these opportunities based on, using the formula I talked about earlier. So now when I look at that and I think about what might happen with a future tariff increase or any other form of cost increase, I can start to say, well, look, I've got a lot of opportunity as I think about my selling pricing here, but that may be hard. But look at what I've got. Air shipments. I've got 6, if I keep doing air shipments the way I've been doing them, and I know a lot of you can relate to that, I'm forecasting I'm going to spend almost $7 million on air shipments, just because that's been the history for that particular product or all those products, depending on how you want to look at it. Warehouse costs, inventory carrying costs, another really big area where the bullwhip effect is in, full gear, if you will. Transportation costs. And remember, this is not just saying, hey, there's $12.8 million in opportunity in transportation costs. You can look at specifically what products have that opportunity, what lanes have that opportunity, what carriers within that lane have that opportunity, because I have it at the transactional level, right? I'm building this up from the bottom up, the 4 billion transactions. So I can tell you specifically how that $12.8 million was calculated. And let's just go back to the recap. So maybe these recaps make, a little more sense now. When we're thinking about tariff mitigation or any disruption, we want to be able to understand what costs are associated with your profitable, your marginal, and your unprofitable products and customers, regions, markets, and channels. You want to be able to protect the actual margin contribution for your really great products and customers. That's essential. So you're not going to, obviously you don't necessarily want to raise prices if you've already got a huge amount of margin already associated with just a few customers and their products. You want to create diversified strategies that are based on that understanding. And that understanding, once again, I'm being very repetitive, I apologize, is an understanding that you trust and is cross-functionally accepted. Everyone knows it's true because the data has been validated and verified with your subject matter experts every month, and there is no disagreement that what they're seeing is wrong. You want to be able to then focus on where the high value is. As opposed to getting a lot of time on data, you're moving to what we should do, right? You're getting cross-functional, support for your S&OP processes, which should certainly lead to competitive advantage. And you're basing this on information that is repeatable and scalable across the enterprise. So with that, we are more than happy to answer questions. A lot of questions we typically get when we're talking to people about this is, how long does this take? Is this another ERP system? The answer is no. We can zero in on the specific ways that this could work for you in 2 90-minute discovery calls. And this is typically the first step of this process, which is, what we call diagnostic, which is where are the opportunities we've been talking about, is typically done in 10 weeks. So I'm going to pick on you, Brad, since you opened us up here. What are your thoughts?
Well, I learned a lot just from, still learning the whole language on the tariff side. I'm in the beautiful sales side of the world, so I say yes to everything. And then, oh yeah, we can do that. Yes, we can do that. And then you realize, this part of the world is changing so quick. And in order to stay competitive, even my company on we're an NVOCC, so we are quoting customers and everything like that. And tariffs do affect our quotes on some of the e-commerce stuff we're doing. And, it really just opens my eyes on how we really have to embrace this and get more proactive in this technology and this knowledge. So I thought your talk was spectacular, and I made a bunch of notes, and I'm going to be sharing this with our team too, I'm sure, which they'll have more questions.
Wonderful. Well, that's our goal, is to get people comfortable. We were talking, Brad, before the webinar actually started, that one of our challenges as a company is people are tired of talking about AI. That is unfortunately, a lot of hype.
Yeah.
And, we want to give people the reassurance that, we're using a crawl, walk, run approach here, but obviously handling the kind of volume we're talking about on data on a monthly basis. And I didn't mention this, but when we're running this every month for a company, we're taking all of that data, we're verifying and validating with the subject matter experts for that company. We're creating all the new analytics that are focused on what they want to know, and we're doing that in 5 days or less.
Wow.
Yeah. The power of AI.
Yeah, that's huge. That is definitely huge. So, we really appreciate you joining us. Tammy, thank you for all your hard work in this. They will be sharing this presentation. Please, reach out to Richard and the team if your company would like to talk to them more. And if you have other organizations that you're a part of that you would like Richard and the team to present this, our different topics, please reach out to Richard or reach out to me, and I'm happy to get you guys in touch. So again, thanks everybody for joining us. and have a damn fine summer.
Very good. Thank you all. We appreciate your time.